The weather was brutally cold. Snow fell continuously. The men had no winter clothing, no hot food, and limited ammunition. The Germans surrounded Bastogne completely, cutting off all supply lines. Dick Winters and his men dug foxholes in the frozen ground and prepared to die defending this small Belgian town. The German commander sent a surrender ultimatum to the American forces. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, commanding the 101st Airborne, sent back a one-word reply: nuts. The battle for Bastogne had begun in earnest. For the next week, Easy Company fought off constant German attacks. Artillery shells rained down continuously. German tanks prowled the perimeter. Casualties mounted. Dick Winters commanded Easy Company from a foxhole, coordinating defensive fires and shifting his men to meet each new German attack. He visited every position every day, checking on his men, sharing what little food and ammunition they had, keeping morale up through his calm presence. The men were freezing, starving, and dying, but they held the line because Dick Winters told them they would. On December 26th, General Patton's Third Army broke through the German encirclement and relieved Bastogne. Easy Company had held. Dick Winters had lost many men, but the Germans had been stopped. The Battle of the Bulge would continue for weeks, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Germany had spent its last reserves in a desperate gamble and failed. In January 1945, Dick Winters was promoted to major and made the battalion executive officer. He could no longer command Easy Company directly. His responsibilities now covered the entire 2nd Battalion. He was heartbroken to leave Easy Company, but he understood the needs of the service. Lieutenant Ronald Spears took command of Easy Company, and Dick moved up to battalion staff. The war in Europe was nearing its end. Easy Company fought through France, into Germany, and eventually to Bavaria. Dick Winters coordinated battalion operations, planned assaults, and ensured his soldiers had what they needed to win. He was no longer in the front lines every day, but his influence was felt throughout the battalion. In May 1945, Easy Company, now part of Dick's battalion, discovered a Nazi concentration camp near Landsberg. The soldiers walked into hell on earth. Emaciated prisoners, mass graves, evidence of systematic murder. Dick Winters had seen terrible things in war, but nothing prepared him for this. He organized immediate medical care for the survivors and documented the atrocities. Years later, he would say that discovering that camp gave meaning to all the fighting and dying. They weren't just winning a war, they were ending evil. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Dick Winters had survived. So had most of his men in Easy Company. They had jumped into Normandy, fought through France, Holland, Belgium, and Germany. They had earned a reputation as one of the finest combat units in American military history, and Dick Winters had led them through it all. But Dick's war wasn't quite over. Easy Company was preparing to deploy to the Pacific to fight Japan when the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered in August 1945. The war was finally, completely over. Dick Winters could go home. He was discharged from the Army in November 1945 at the rank of Major. He was 27 years old. He had spent 3 years in the military, 18 months in combat. He had earned the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and numerous other decorations. But more importantly, he had earned the eternal respect of every man who served under him. Dick Winters returned to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He married Ethel Estopy in 1948, a woman he had known before the war. He started a business career, eventually becoming a successful businessman. He and Ethel lived a quiet, peaceful life on a farm in Pennsylvania. Dick rarely spoke about his war experiences. He attended reunions with his Easy Company veterans, maintaining those bonds of brotherhood, but he never sought publicity or glory. For decades, Dick Winters lived in obscurity. Very few people knew that the quiet businessman in Lancaster had been one of the greatest combat leaders of World War II. His men knew. They told their children and grandchildren about Dick Winters, the officer who saved their lives through brilliant tactics and genuine care for his soldiers. Then in 1992, historian Stephen Ambrose published a book called Band of Brothers, telling the story of Easy Company from training through the end of the war. Dick Winters was a central figure in the book. Suddenly, at age 74, Dick Winters was famous. The book became a bestseller. In 2001, it was adapted into an HBO miniseries that won multiple Emmy Awards. Dick Winters handled fame the same way he handled everything else, with quiet dignity and deflection of praise. He always insisted that the real heroes were the men who didn't come home, the soldiers who died in Normandy, Holland, and Bastogne. He attended screenings and premieres, but only because it honored all the veterans of Easy Company. He gave speeches at military academies, teaching young officers about leadership and sacrifice. Historians and military officers studied Dick Winters' tactical decisions. The assault on Brecourt Manor is still taught at West Point as a perfect example of small unit tactics. His leadership style, leading from the front, caring for his men, never asking them to take risks he wouldn't take himself, became a model for officer training. Dick Winters influenced generations of military leaders without ever intending to. In his later years, Dick Winters reflected on what leadership meant. He wrote down his thoughts, simple principles that guided his life. Strive to be a leader of character, competence, and courage. Lead from the front. Maintain your physical and mental fitness. Make the hard decisions. Be willing to serve in any position. Have a passion for continual self-improvement. These weren't fancy management theories. They were the hard-won lessons of a man who led soldiers in the worst conditions imaginable. Dick Winters also reflected on the cost of war. He carried the weight of every man he lost. He remembered their names, their faces, their families. He wondered why he survived when so many didn't. He suffered from what we would now call survivor's guilt, though he never used that term. He simply felt a responsibility to live a life worthy of those who died under his command. Richard Winters died on January 2, 2011, at the age of 92. He died peacefully at his home, surrounded by family. His funeral was attended by veterans of Easy Company, now old men themselves, who came to pay their respects one final time. They buried him with full military honors in a cemetery overlooking the Pennsylvania countryside he loved. His legacy extends far beyond the battles he won. Dick Winters proved that true leadership isn't about being the toughest or the loudest. It's about competence, courage, and caring for those you lead. He showed that an ordinary man from a small Pennsylvania town could rise to meet extraordinary challenges through preparation, determination, and moral clarity. The men of Easy Company went on to live full lives. They became businessmen, teachers, police officers, farmers. They raised families, contributed to their communities, and helped build the prosperous post-war America they had fought to preserve. But they never forgot the young lieutenant who led them through hell and brought most of them home alive. Today, when military leaders speak about the ideal officer, they often mention Dick Winters. His name has become synonymous with battlefield leadership and personal integrity. His tactical decisions are studied in military academies around the world. His leadership principles are taught to new officers entering the service. But Dick Winters would have been uncomfortable with all this attention. He never considered himself a hero. He was just a man who did his duty to the best of his ability. He made decisions based on what would best accomplish the mission while protecting his men. He led from the front because he couldn't ask others to take risks he wasn't willing to take himself. The moment that defined Dick Winters' entire legacy, the moment mentioned at the beginning of this story, came decades after the war. An interviewer once asked him what he thought about when he looked back on his war experiences. Dick Winters paused a long moment, then gave an answer that revealed the true measure of the man. He said that he hoped that when his grandchildren asked him what he did in the war, he could honestly tell them, "I tried to be a good leader. I tried to make the right decisions, and I tried to bring as many men home alive as I possibly could." That was Dick Winters. Not a warrior seeking glory, not a hero craving recognition, just a good man doing his best in terrible circumstances.
Then, one afternoon, Hathcock spotted a group of Viet Cong moving along a jungle trail. Among them was a woman, young, carrying a rifle, moving with the confidence of a trained soldier. Through his scope, Hathcock watched her. Something about her manner, The way other Viet Cong deferred to her told him this was Apache. The shot was difficult, over 700 yards through jungle vegetation, but Hathcock had one chance. He steadied his breathing, calculated the wind, and squeezed the trigger. The woman fell. The other Viet Cong scattered in panic, unable to determine where the shot had come from. Hathcock and Burke withdrew silently, disappearing into the jungle before the enemy could react. Later intelligence confirmed that the woman killed was indeed Apache. The torture murders stopped immediately. Hathcock felt no pride in killing a woman, but he understood the necessity. She had murdered American prisoners in the most brutal ways possible. She was a legitimate military target, and he had eliminated a threat to his fellow Marines. But the mission that would define Carlos Hathcock's legend came later, a mission so difficult and dangerous that many historians still question whether it actually happened the way Hathcock described it. The mission to kill a North Vietnamese Army general. Intelligence had identified an NVA general who was coordinating major operations against American forces. He was protected by an entire company of NVA soldiers and rarely left his heavily defended headquarters. Command decided that eliminating this general could disrupt enemy operations for months. Carlos Hathcock was given the mission. The general's headquarters was located deep in enemy-controlled territory, over 10 miles from the nearest American position. The area was heavily patrolled by NVA troops. Any American military force sent to attack would be detected and destroyed before reaching the target. The only way to reach the general was through stealth, and that meant Carlos Hathcock. Hathcock and Burke studied aerial photographs and intelligence reports for days. They identified a position about 1,200 yards from the headquarters building, an impossible shot by 1960s standards, but just barely within the theoretical range of Hathcock's rifle. The problem was reaching that position. It required crossing open fields, crawling past enemy patrols, and moving through areas where any sound or movement would alert NVA soldiers. Hathcock decided to attempt the mission. He and Burke stripped down to minimal equipment: rifles, ammunition, water, and nothing else. No food, no sleeping gear, no extra clothing. They covered themselves in mud and local vegetation. And then they began to crawl. For 3 days and 4 nights, Carlos Hathcock and John Burke crawled through enemy territory. They moved during daylight hours, when enemy patrols were least active, advancing inches at a time. At night, they froze in position, unable to move for fear of being detected. NVA patrols sometimes passed within a few feet of their position. Hathcock described later how he could hear enemy soldiers talking, could see their boots passing by his face, could smell their cigarettes, and hear them laughing. One wrong move, a cough, a sneeze, even a deep breath at the wrong moment would reveal their position and result in immediate death. They couldn't even swat at the insects that crawled over their bodies, biting and stinging without mercy. The physical toll was enormous. After 3 days without real food or sleep, crawling through mud and vegetation, both men were on the edge of collapse. But Hathcock's years of hunting in Arkansas had prepared him for this. He knew how to ignore pain, how to focus his mind, how to maintain discipline even when his body screamed for rest. He kept moving, inch by inch, toward the shooting position. On the 4th morning, they finally reached the position Hathcock had selected. It was a slight rise in the ground, covered with tall grass, offering a clear line of sight to the headquarters building 1,200 yards away. Hathcock carefully set up his rifle, checking and rechecking every adjustment. Burke began watching the building through binoculars, waiting for the target to appear. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, bringing crushing heat. Hathcock remained motionless behind his rifle, barely breathing, his eye pressed to the scope. Finally, Burke spotted movement. The general emerged from the headquarters building, surrounded by aides and bodyguards. He stopped on the building's steps, looking around, presenting a target. Hathcock made rapid calculations. The distance was extreme, 1,200 yards, far beyond the range where most snipers would even attempt a shot. The wind was variable, gusting unpredictably. The target was only visible from the chest up, and surrounded by other people. One shot. If he missed, the general would disappear and they would never get another chance. Carlos Hathcock steadied his breathing. He calculated wind speed and direction, bullet drop, all the factors that would affect the shot. He aimed high and slightly left, compensating for distance and wind. And then, when everything felt exactly right, when every variable aligned, he squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. Through the scope, Hathcock watched the bullet's impact. The general's chest exploded in red mist. He fell backwards onto the steps. His bodyguards dove for cover, shouting in panic, unable to determine where the shot had come from. Hathcock and Burke immediately began their withdrawal. They knew the area would be swarming with NVA soldiers within minutes, searching for the sniper. They crawled away from the position, moving as quickly as stealth allowed. Behind them, they could hear shouting and gunfire as enemy forces searched for them. The withdrawal took another 2 days. By the time Hathcock and Burke reached American lines, they had been behind enemy territory for nearly a week. They were dehydrated, starving, covered in insect bites and jungle rot. But they had accomplished the mission. The NVA general was dead, killed by one of the longest-range sniper shots in military history. Command initially had trouble believing Hathcock's report. A confirmed kill at 1,200 yards seemed impossible with the technology of that era. But intelligence soon confirmed the general's death, and the circumstances matched Hathcock's description exactly. The mission became legendary within the Marine Corps, but details remained classified for years. But Hathcock's war was far from over. His success had made him famous among Marines and notorious among the enemy. The North Vietnamese knew about the American sniper with the white feather in his hatband, Hathcock's personal trademark. They put a bounty on his head, $30,000, an enormous sum in Vietnam, for anyone who could kill the American sniper. North Vietnamese commanders sent their own snipers to hunt Hathcock. The most skilled marksmen in the NVA Army were given one mission: find and kill Carlos Hathcock. The hunter had become the hunted. Hathcock knew about the bounty but refused to change his tactics. He continued to wear the white feather in his hatband, a psychological gesture. He was telling the enemy exactly who he was, daring them to try to kill him. One of these enemy snipers came terrifyingly close to succeeding. Known to Americans as the Cobra, this NVA sniper had his own reputation for exceptional skill. Intelligence indicated that he had killed several American soldiers and was actively hunting for Hathcock. Hathcock decided to go after him first, turning the hunt around. The encounter happened on a jungle trail. Hathcock and Burke were moving through thick vegetation when Burke spotted sunlight reflecting off glass, a rifle scope, positioned in thick undergrowth about 300 yards away. The Cobra had found them first and was preparing to shoot. Hathcock had one split second to react. Both snipers saw each other simultaneously. Both fired at almost the same instant. Hathcock's bullet entered the enemy's rifle scope, traveled through the scope tube, and hit the enemy sniper in the eye, killing him instantly. The Cobra's shot missed by inches, passing close enough that Hathcock felt the shockwave.
The physics of that shock were nearly impossible. For Hathcock's bullet to enter the scope, the enemy sniper had to be looking directly at Hathcock at the exact moment of firing. A fraction of a second earlier or later, and the scope wouldn't have been aligned. It was luck, skill, and fate combined in one impossible moment. Hathcock later said he never wanted to take a shot like that again. The memory of seeing another human being through a rifle scope at the instant of death haunted him for the rest of his life. By 1969, Carlos Hathcock had 93 confirmed kills, making him the most successful American sniper of the Vietnam War. But confirmed kills required a witness and official documentation. Most historians believe his actual total was over 300. Each kill was a carefully considered shot, taken only when necessary, executed with professional precision. But the psychological toll was enormous. Hathcock began having nightmares. He saw the faces of men he had killed. He questioned whether what he was doing was right, even though he knew intellectually that he was eliminating enemy combatants who were trying to kill American soldiers. The weight of taking so many lives, even enemy lives, was crushing. In September 1969, Carlos Hathcock's war ended in the most terrible way possible. He was riding in an LVTP-5 armored personnel carrier when it struck a landmine. The vehicle exploded, engulfing in flames. 7 Marines were trapped inside, including Hathcock. Despite being severely burned himself, Hathcock pulled Marines from the burning vehicle, saving 7 lives before collapsing from his own injuries. Hathcock suffered burns over much of his body. His face, arms, and legs were severely damaged. He was evacuated to a hospital ship, then to a burn center in Texas. Doctors said he would never walk again. The pain was constant and excruciating. His career as a sniper was over. At age 27, Carlos Hathcock faced a future of disability and chronic pain. But Hathcock's warrior spirit remained unbroken. Through months of agonizing physical therapy, he learned to walk again. He would never be fully healed. The burn scars covered his body and he lived with constant pain for the rest of his life. But he could function, and more importantly, he could teach. The Marine Corps assigned Hathcock to develop a formal sniper training program. For years, American military sniping had been more art than science, with techniques passed informally from one shooter to another. Hathcock changed that. He wrote the Marine Corps' first sniper training manual, codifying techniques he had developed in Vietnam. He taught new generations of Marine snipers at what would become the United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, Virginia. His students included men who would later serve in every major American conflict. Hathcock taught marksmanship, but also fieldcraft, camouflage, patience, and the mental discipline required for sniping. He taught that sniping wasn't about killing, it was about completing the mission while protecting American lives. Hathcock's methods became the foundation of modern military sniping. His emphasis on stealth, patience, and precision influenced sniper training not just in the Marine Corps, but in militaries around the world. Techniques he developed in Vietnam are still taught today in sniper schools from Fort Benning to Quantico to training facilities of allied nations. But Carlos Hathcock's body was failing. The burns he suffered in 1969 had caused permanent damage. By the early 1970s, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, likely triggered or accelerated by his injuries. The disease slowly destroyed his nervous system. By his 40s, Hathcock was using a wheelchair. The man who once crawled for 3 days through enemy territory could no longer walk across a room. The disease didn't stop him from teaching. Even from his wheelchair, Hathcock continued to instruct Marine snipers, sharing his knowledge and experience. He wrote articles about sniping techniques. He consulted with military leaders on sniper tactics and equipment. His mind remained sharp, his dedication to the Marine Corps never wavering. Hathcock retired from the Marine Corps in 1979 at the rank of gunnery sergeant. He received numerous decorations, including the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and multiple other awards. But the medals meant little to him. What mattered was that he had served honorably, that he had saved American lives, and that he had passed his knowledge to the next generation. His final years were difficult. Multiple sclerosis is a cruel disease, progressively robbing patients of physical ability. Hathcock required increasing levels of care. His wife, Jo, devoted herself to caring for him, just as he had once devoted himself to protecting Marines in Vietnam. They remained married through all the hardships, their bond strengthened by shared struggle. Carlos Hathcock died on February 22, 1999, at the age of 56. The disease that had tortured him for decades finally ended his suffering. He was buried at Arlington National Aerium with full military honors. Marines from around the country attended his funeral, paying respects to the man who had defined their profession. His legacy extends far beyond his 93 confirmed kills. Carlos Hathcock revolutionized military sniping, transforming it from a battlefield improvisation into a precise military specialty. The techniques he developed, the standards he set, and the professionalism he embodied became the foundation of modern military sniping war. The United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper School, which Hathcock helped establish, continues to produce the world's finest military snipers. Every graduate learns about Hathcock, studies his missions, and internalizes his principles. The white feather he wore in his hat has become a symbol of the sniper community, representing precision, patience, and professionalism. In 2002, the Marine Corps honored Hathcock by dedicating the sniper training facility at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, as the Carlos Hathcock Range. Thousands of Marines have trained there, learning the skills that Hathcock pioneered. His influence continues to save American lives decades after his death. Modern military snipers carry equipment far superior to what Hathcock had in Vietnam. Advanced optics, specialized ammunition, better rifles. Technology has revolutionized the field. But the fundamental principles remain the same: patience, stealth, precision, and the mental discipline to remain calm under impossible pressure. These are the lessons Carlos Hathcock taught, and they remain valid today. Books have been written about Hathcock's exploits. Marine Sniper, 93 Confirmed Kills by Charles Henderson became a bestseller, introducing Hathcock's story to the general public. Military historians study his missions as examples of small unit tactics and psychological warfare. His story has been featured in documentaries, magazine articles, and military training materials. But perhaps Hathcock's most important legacy is personal. He showed that even in war's darkest moments, professionalism and honor can prevail. He never killed unnecessarily. He never celebrated death. He treated his role as a solemn responsibility, eliminating enemy combatants to protect American lives. This moral clarity, this refusal to become what he fought against, made him not just an effective sniper, but an honorable warrior. The Marines who served with Hathcock remember him not for his kill count, but for his character. He was quiet, humble, and professional. He never bragged about his accomplishments. He deflected praise, insisting that he was simply doing his job. This humility, combined with extraordinary skill, made him a leader worth following. Carlos Hathcock once said that he didn't like killing, but he was good at it, and doing it saved American lives. This statement encapsulates his entire approach to war. He understood the moral weight of taking human life. He didn't hide from that responsibility or pretend it was glorious. He simply accepted that in war, difficult things must be done, and if they must be done, they should be done as professionally and humanely as possible. The moment that defined Carlos Hathcock's legacy, the moment mentioned at the beginning of the story, came near the end of his life. An interviewer asked him how he wanted to be remembered. Hathcock thought for a long moment and then gave an answer that revealed the true measure of the man. He said he didn't want to be remembered for the men he killed. He wanted to be remembered for the Marines he saved. Every enemy soldier he eliminated was one who couldn't kill Americans. Every mission he completed successfully was one that didn't require sending in large forces where many would die. His legacy wasn't death. It was life, the lives of American service members who came home because Carlos Hathcock did his job with skill and honor. That was Carlos Hathcock, not a killer seeking glory, not a warrior celebrating violence, just a quiet professional doing a difficult job to the absolute best of his ability. And in doing so, he became the standard by which all military snipers are measured.